Because when you are being a false version of yourself, people are going to say, hey, we need you to be more confident because you think you're being a version of yourself at work that you think is coming through, but you may not fully have the self-awareness to know how you're coming through.
You're listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author Sarah Box. We focus on the mantra, no labels, no limits, no excuses. And now without further ado, please welcome your commanding coach with plenty of chutzpah and heart, Sarah Box.
Hey there, No Labels, No Limits podcast listeners. Welcome back to another podcast where we tend to explore stories of personal growth and transformation. And today we are joined by Jenna Washnieski, a leader coach who integrates her rich experience in coaching and dance into powerful insights for both personal and professional life. Now, Jen and I were talking before I hit record, and she is, like all our guests, very multidimensional, but she has some interesting stories she likes to share or bring up when possible. So we may get into that. We'll see. But when she started as an executive lead in an executive leadership role in her mid-30s, she believed she somehow needed to prove she was worthy of that role. How many of us can relate to that? I know I can. And because of this, she ended up being a watered down version of herself and became disconnected from her incredible skills, strengths, and passions that she knew deep down are what made her or continue to make her unique. So because of this, she ended up moving forward and learning that getting to know herself, her values, and her greatness was a critical step to becoming confident and a self-aware leader. So that's why today Jenna champions that into more effective and fulfilling leadership opportunities for those she works with. So today we're going to talk about a range of things, but I want to formally welcome Jenna to the podcast. Hi, Jenna.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it was fun laughing with you a little before, and because I always like to, number one, make sure all the tech is working, but I just find it interesting to just get a little nugget of information from someone. But, you know, one of the things that spoke to me in reading about you and learning about you was the importance you put on balancing professional ambitions with personal passions, such as your dance career, and then how I think you've learned to maintain a balance or some sort of interplay between the two. So how has that happened? How have you come to where you are today?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for asking. And I don't know if it was ever an intentional thing where I'm like, I'm going to make sure that I have more balance in my life. But and you called me a multidimensional person. And I think all of us are multidimensional in so many ways. And the more that we can see that and embrace that and practice that, it helps us from feeling stuck, from feeling burnt out, from feeling one-dimensional of just I wake up, I go to my job, I come home, I go to sleep, I do it all over again. So really, taking a step back and looking at what are the things that I love doing? When I feel like my most favorite self, what am I doing? What am I making time for? And I've always been someone who, I grew up in the middle of the country in northern Wisconsin with nobody around. And so I just created a lot. I had just imaginary friends, and my sister and I made stuff up. And so I always tried to find ways to integrate fun and play and performance and creativity ever since I was young. And so that has just followed me. And again, not sure that it was ever really intentional that I was doing it, but I knew that for me to feel like my most whole, connected, authentic self, that needed to be a critical piece of that puzzle.
So I'm curious, you talk about growing up with your sister, but really not a lot of others around you. How do you think for folks or our young folks today that even if they are growing up in the middle of nowhere, if they've got internet, they are not necessarily alone, right? But I'm just wondering how you might be observing or thinking about the difference between having that opportunity to create for yourself, you and your sister, versus looking and finding ways for entertainment kind of reach you, like more passive without having to engage in it. That's not a clear question, but it's what's occurring to me.
That makes sense, because I look back and I think a lot of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s are like, thank goodness we did not have cell phones in high school, right? Thank goodness we did not have social media in high school, because I think it just allowed us a lot more freedom to discover who we were, without all of that external influence. And I mean, not that there wasn't, like MTV and cable and all that stuff, but there was a different level of responsibility on each of us to shape who we are. At least that's how I'm perceiving it. Maybe some Gen Z folks would say differently to me, but I think that because I was, I guess, forced is such a harsh word, but because I was forced to really figure out what lit me up, what made me happy, what was fun for me. I think it allowed me to discover parts of myself a little more deeply than waiting for it to be passively handed off to me. And, just thinking back of the times when I was, quote, bored, and how nice it is and how we undervalue how important it is to feel bored sometimes, just to sit with that discomfort of like restlessness and boredom and what it's there to teach us. And so I think that was also, as I'm saying that out loud now, probably a really critical part of my upbringing too.
I think so. I do remember moments of being bored. And so no one in my family tried to solve it for me. It was like, well, go outside and do something. Like, it's on you. Go do something. But out of a lot of that came a lot of discovery, some mischief, some accidents that had to be bandaged up, but it was from playing and making stuff up, right? Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm saying too, is like the freedom to make those kind of mistakes and play and whatever, and be silly.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so, for sure.
Yeah. And I'm not saying kids can't do that today, but there was no mirror of what the correct thing might look like, right?
Right. So, that's such a good point. There wasn't, you just assume that what you're doing is normal as a kid growing up without any external, information around you. So there wasn't this, I don't know, I didn't feel like insecure or comparing.
Not a comparison thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you mean this isn't normal? My sister and I think it is.
Well, and this is interesting because one of my favorite things that my sister and I used to do when we would spend time in our respective bedrooms with our doors closed, and we had little mailboxes outside of our doors, and we'd spend several hours playing what we call mail, and we would make little pieces of mail and drop them off at each other's mailboxes, and it'd be like, I would make like magazines for her Barbies in her Barbie house, and she'd like order the magazine and subscribe to it. Then I'd like spend time cutting out things from my magazines to make little tiny Barbie magazines. And we would spend hours playing, but completely separately, doing our own thing. And thinking about myself now and how I prefer to work and how I prefer to interact, like I love kind of like parallel play, parallel partnership where, I could be with my partner and we could be not talking for a good 2 hours, but doing our separate things right next to each other. And I'm perfectly happy. And I think that started when my sister and I would play mail for several hours on a Sunday afternoon. So
that's
things
hilarious.
Like that, looking back, have taught me now how I prefer to work and how I prefer to interact.
Look how mail has evolved.
Right.
So now you're thinking about if you had to do that today, you could go on Pinterest, pull all these pictures together, send her a magazine, put it together as a flip book, whatever. But right. I just think that's such a great example and how you prefer and are comfortable today, the time. So that's pretty cool. Actually, it's very cool. But, you talked about thinking when you got into leadership in your 30s that you had to prove you were worthy of leadership. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Like a lot of your guests are and a lot of your listeners are, I've always been a pretty high achiever and I like to be the best at stuff. And, but I'm also someone who is unafraid of trying new things, falling down, making mistakes. So it is kind of there's some tension between those two things. I want to be really, really good at stuff, but also I'm unafraid of like jumping in and trying new things as well. And that's kind of what I was approaching with this leadership role, where I moved from Minneapolis, where I had lived for 13 years, had a really well-established, social network, and I had family there, I had a dance career there, and then moved to Kansas City where I didn't know anybody, and it was a brand new frontier for me. And on top of all of that, I am stepping into this executive leadership role, and so I felt like I had a lot to prove to people that, hey, we're moving this girl from this city to this city. We're making an investment in her. So I just felt this pressure that I needed to prove to everyone that I was worthy and deserving of being here. And even though I don't know the community and don't know a lot of this, territory, gosh darn it, I'm gonna show you that you didn't make the wrong decision. And so I was playing that story in my head that I had to prove that I was worthy of being in this position, and it got the better of me. And that
What
story
happened?
got louder and louder. Yeah.
Well, how did it get the better of you, Jenna?
So I think, I think that because I think I was trying to prove, again, externally to everyone I could do this, but also internally to myself that I could do this. I didn't have, thinking back, one of the things that I wish I would have had in place during that time that I didn't was a really strong social network. Moving to a new place, I didn't have a lot of friends. I, of course, had friends in different cities and stuff, but I have always been someone who's been able to figure things out. And I think I just believe that if I just muscle my way through this, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I'll be great. It'll be fine. And I think this pressure cooker was building inside of me where I did not have that social outlet to be able to release some of it. And so I think that I just kept it all inside, and that's how it got the better of me. Because that's just if I just try harder, I'll do better. And that just created even more pressure for me. And I just became unable to really see the big picture of what was going on.
Well, then what happened? I mean, because that's not who I'm talking to today.
Right.
I can feel it. You're not, well, I don't feel that I have felt that backed up pressure with folks. Like I'm thinking something else is at play here and it's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So, but you feel totally present. You feel loose, if that's, like flow.
Yep.
So what happened? How did you go from that backed up pressure? And then what was the catalyst for moving forward?
Yeah. And I would say it wasn't just one pivotal moment. Like some people have those really great pivotal moments. And for me, it was just a bunch of tiny little pivotal moments that I didn't even realize were pivotal as they were happening until it just kind of all happened at once. But I mean, a few things happened. One is I was in my role for a little while. So I built the confidence of knowing what I was doing. And so there was that part of me that got to calm down a little bit and know that I was doing my best. And then another thing that was the kind of pivotal was I had a supervisor at the time that, during our performance appraisal at the end of the year, she's like, you know what, Jenna? You've been here for a while and people look up to you. They want to hear from you. We need you to speak up more in these, big executive meetings. She said, we need you to be more confident. And I was like, wait a second. You mean other people can see that I'm not confident? I thought I was just keeping that masked really well. And so I'm like, well, that's not how I want to be seen as a leader. And it really stopped me in my tracks to ask myself, okay, so how do I want to be seen as a leader? If people are perceiving me as not being confident, who do I want to be, and how do I embrace that and be that and practice that? And so it was this moment of me really looking internally and figuring out, what are my values? What matters to me? What do I bring to this role that they need that nobody else has? Really investigating all of these true gifts inside of me. And when I did that internal work to really discover who I was and what mattered to me, I was able to see the places in my life where I was not living in alignment with that. And so there were things one of my values is growth, and another one is creativity. And there were places in my career where I was just feeling stifled in those ways. And so I wasn't able to live in those ways. Similarly, in my marriage at the time, same thing. I was not being able to live fully in alignment with those values. And then I really stepped back and said, okay, So what do I need to do to live more in alignment with these values? And that's when I started unraveling some things in my life and really stepping into this version of me I am today.
Yeah, it's not, you don't have an aha and then the next day everything's different.
Right.
You have an aha and then it's like you get to work.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. So where did you start?
Ooh, one of the things that I did kind of immediately after my manager was like, we need to be more confident. So it's not really like I can write my professional development plan for the year and have a goal is be more confident, right? That's not a SMART goal.
It's not.
And it's not, like you said, it's not like just overnight it's going to change. So one of the first things I put into place, and I'm sure a lot of listeners have a gratitude practice. Maybe you have one, Sarah, where, at the end of the day, you write down the things you're grateful for. I have been very, very moderately successful with that kind of practice. I'm really good for like 2 weeks and then I just abandon it.
Something else comes in.
Yes, there's always something else. But I thought to myself, well, what if I create what I call a confidence practice? And at the end of every day, I jot down something that made me feel confident that day. It could be I spoke up in that meeting. I wore like a really badass dress. Whatever those things are that made me feel really confident that day, taking time to notice it. Because confidence means something different for every single one of us. And the more that we can start noticing naming what confidence means to us and then start noticing when we're being that confident self, you can start to see some of those, wheels be set into motion. So that's one of the first things I did was my confidence practice. Yeah. And then, after that, it was a lot of things. I actually went through a yoga teacher training because I've practiced yoga for like 15 years and thought, hey, maybe I should do this yoga teacher training. And it was such a personal transformation going through that training. So it was that. And then I turned 40, which is another transformational time in someone's life. And then
howdy.
yeah. And then I really, really took a hard look at my life and said, is this what I want to be doing? I'm good at my job, but is this what I want to be doing with it? I really like my husband a lot, but do I want to be married? Like I really starting to chip away at all of these things. And, spoiler alert, I got a divorce and I had a pretty big career pivot and I've made a lot of different choices for myself that feel much more aligned with who I am. And holy man, let me tell you, like when you have the courage to make really hard choices for yourself and align yourself with the life that deep down you're designed to live, like everything just falls into place and it's super freaking scary. But when you do it, it's amazing.
So here's a question I have for you because, this is normal for you because you've done the work, you're here, you can speak about this. And so it flows very effortlessly out of your mouth because you're in alignment, right? Mm-hmm. But when you can align with the work that you were here or meant to do, that for me is a phrase that only begs more questions. How do you know? Is there a click? How do you know you're doing the work you were meant to do versus the work someone else says, wow, Jenna, you're really good at this. You should keep doing it. And so you tell yourself that.
Yes.
I think there's a distinction, yes?
Yes, 100%. And like I mentioned before, I've always been an achiever. I've always been a leader. I was a senior class president. I always took on leadership roles. I did the thing that you're supposed to do next. Like I went to college and then I went to graduate school and then I got the job and then I got the husband and the mortgage and I was regularly climbing this ladder that I thought I was supposed to do because that's what you hear. That's what you hear from the world. That's what people celebrate you for. And it was really, and just a point of vulnerability here, my ex-husband and I had tried to have kids. It didn't work out for us. I had a couple of pregnancy losses. And that was really an impetus for me too, to say, okay, so this thing that I thought I was quote supposed to do and have a family, I can't do this. And actually, I don't think I want to do this. I don't think it's actually something I wanted. I think it was something that I thought I was supposed to do. And I was afraid I was going to disappoint people if I didn't do it, right? A lot of us are these people pleasers. We don't want to disappoint people. But it was really those really hard losses that made me realize I don't think I want this, and I think that's okay. Mm-hmm. And so for us to really look at these things in our life and say, do I really want this house with this mortgage? Do I really want this job? Do I really want this thing that I think I'm, quote, supposed to have? And really like being honest with yourself about it. I had a lot of those moments where I just said, this ladder of success that I thought was going to reach to this pinnacle of happiness at one point, I achieved all the rungs of the ladder and I'm still not happy. So what the heck? Like, what else? What should I be doing? And so it was, I like to say that, in my practice, I like to help people live the life they're designed to live, not the life they think they're, quote, supposed to live, and really being able to tease out the difference between those two things.
So let's pivot a little bit.
Yeah.
Talk about your practice, because there are a lot of coaches and leadership coaches, but I'm interested in the different ways because I find our practices reflect our journeys, but also what we've seen helps folks, whoever they are, right, from what we know. So take me through, and my listeners through, if we were in your practice, what would the journey look like, Jenna?
Yeah. So I love to explore this place where I like to call it the intersection of personal development and professional development. It's, we think that we go to work, we're one version of ourselves, and then we go home and we're another version of ourselves. And, from my journey, remember, like me having to have this reconciliation of what are my values? What do I love to do? What am I uniquely designed to do? Because when you are being a false version of yourself, people are going to say, hey, we need you to be more confident because you think you're being a version of yourself at work that you think is coming through, but you may not fully have the self-awareness to know how you're coming through. So in my practice, I like to focus on really like internally, who are you? What matters to you? What do you love to do? Like, could you play mail with your sister for hours still in your 30s or 40s, right? Like, what do you love to do and why? And what strengths do you bring? And, what is the influence that you have and what kind of listener are you? And so really like understanding your internal landscape so that you can come to work with a really strong foundation of self-awareness where you can build trust because people around you know what to expect from you because you know what to expect from you. So I really think like the better you know yourself, the more you can show up at work with consistency and clarity, which just allows everybody else the safety and the permission to show up as their own selves too, because you've created that space for them. And we know this. We know that everything at work starts at the top, starts with leaders and how well leaders know themselves. And if you're looking around your team and you're like, this culture isn't great, people are not speaking up, we don't have good communication, that is your invitation to take that mirror to yourself and figure out what's up with me where I might actually be inhibiting this. Yeah. Probably unintentionally with my team. I have no shame in this. Nobody teaches you as you get into a leadership role, like, here's some stuff you're going to have to figure out that's going to might be make or break for you. So that's what I like to do with people is help them, really creating a safe and playful and, creative space to explore those internal places so that they can show up as a leader that they know deep down they're designed to be.
So how long does someone typically work with you through this process? Is it short, longer? Does it evolve? Has they evolved? What's it look like?
Yeah, I'm someone who I believe in creating experiences that work for the person, right? And, I like to work with people for at least 3 months. and having that time together. We do some assessments, we talk about values, we talk about the stories that get in our way from being the leaders we want to be. But I think sometimes, and I get to see this a lot. So in addition to my personal practice, I work as an internal coach at a company here in Kansas City. And I get to work with a lot of emerging leaders. And that's my favorite. That's my favorite group of people to work with. People who are either new in their management or leadership role, or they're aspiring to it, or, maybe they've been in the role for a few years and they're now finally ready to say, holy smokes, wait a second. There's some stuff that I want to get clear on before I continue my leadership journey. And one of the cool things is, getting to work with people who have never really articulated, what kind of leader do I want to be? We always look at these leaders that we've had in the past and we want to emulate them. And, cool. It's fine to like some of those traits of your role models, but you got to really look into yourself and figure out what makes me uniquely designed for this role, and what skills and traits and strengths do I bring that's going to elevate this role, and how do I want the people around me to feel, and what do I need to do to bring more awareness to that so I can create that. So that's where I go from there, and it's depending on how deep and how fast and how far we want to go. I like to work with people for at least 3 months to start.
I find 3 months is a good chance for people, including myself when I'm working with a coach. Less than that, sometimes you're not unpacked. You get to a level, it's that whole onion thing, right? You get to a level and there's stuff there, and then you think, this is great. But if you just hang in there a tad longer, you're going, oh, this is the real gem right here.
Yes.
Because as onions make us cry sometimes, we don't want to go all the way to the core right away.
Right.
So, but I'm curious, because my sense is just from listening to you talk that you are a continual learner about leadership. Yes?
Yes. Okay. One
So,
of my values is growth, and maybe too much growth. But my therapist says I'm one of her clients that could benefit from doing less work, which the overachiever in me likes to hear that gold star.
I know, but that would be a tough one.
It is.
Overachiever, you say do less. Don't you get little hinky with that, going less? If I do less, then what?
Right. No, and that's been the fun discomfort. I've been really loving discomfort lately, which
it sounds counterintuitive, but it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, every time I'm really uncomfortable, I'm all right, there's a lesson here. This is my teacher. What can I do to grow from this by just sitting here doing nothing and just feeling this discomfort? So that's been my new
I hear you. Because I'm thinking, okay, I've got 20 minutes. What can I do with it? And I thought, what if you didn't do anything with it? Oh, that's novel. I'm not sure I like it. But then the next day it comes up and I go, just try it. Try it for 10. You get better. Honestly, I can do half hour, 50 minutes now, drop of a hat. But it is uncomfortable when you think you have to constantly be doing or producing. Mine's not for overachievement. It's just because I need to be relevant, right? So whether it's to my family or whatever, it's okay, you could be doing this and get one thing out of the way. And then I watch people who don't sweat that, and I'm going, they got everything done. They weren't stressed. Try their way.
No, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask you what the story is in those moments for you. And I've got 20 minutes. What if I don't do anything? What does that mean about you if you're not doing something?
Well, like you, I don't mind failing. So I thought the worst that can happen is what I was going to do will still be there in 20 minutes, right? But sometimes the surprise is 20 minutes later, that thing, whatever it is, someone else might have gotten it done because I paused and gave them room to do it. And then I'm thinking, what if I paused more often? And that's a lot at home. Even with my husband, I'm if there's a dish in the sink, I do it just because it's there and I'm doing something else, right? It bugs me. But then I thought, just let them sit for 2 hours. Oh, guess what? They're all done. And so I do part of it for relaxing because I look out the window and I'm thinking about other things. But some of it's just this compulsion to have it done. And I thought, that's just not necessary. You need a break. You could go spend that time meditating or just sitting in nature, which is a bigger hook for me, to just go outside and sit in nature. So I'm thinking, you could do that for 10 minutes. That sounds great. Yeah. So that's what made me ask, is just kind of what do you do with the discomfort of it? But
Right.
it's a growth place.
It
For me,
is.
yeah.
It is.
So who do you study for leadership and how you're learning about leadership?
I mean, I love observing leaders around me. I love connecting with leaders in the community. I like just organically learning in that way, not from like specific books or podcasts. I mean, and I do listen to books and podcasts. I mean, John Maxwell has so many books that I still haven't completely read. And there's no shortage of leadership books out there. Let's just be honest
That's
about
true.
that in the world. But there's, I have to admit, and I do focus on continuous learning, and I do. And I'm sure you have this too, where people come to you and they're like, I'd be interested in a book on hard conversations. Do you have a book like that for me? So I try to have like a library of books in the back of my mind that I can share as a resource.
Mm-hmm.
However, I try to be really balanced with how much leadership development content I'm consuming, because it can become overwhelming and it can start to trigger that part of me that's like, Jenna, you don't know enough about leadership. Who do you think you are to be a leadership coach? If you don't know all these other things about leadership that every single other person on the internet knows. And then I start getting in my head, and then I become that version of myself where I feel like I need to prove to everybody that I'm worthy of being, like that old story comes up. And so while I do listen to, podcasts and books and things like that, I try to be really careful with over consuming them.
Yeah, I agree. Have you ever like read a book and and it's not a leadership book, it's just some other book, and then thought, wow, there's some great leadership tips in there, like how they showed up and did this and did that. And that wasn't the intent of the book. It was for whatever reason, right? Something else. Has that ever happened for you?
Gosh, I'm sure it has. I haven't thought about it in that way. I mean, I think about that with like a lot of the TV shows I watch, where I'm like,
for instance, give me a for instance.
I mean, and this is very silly. And I just finished, for the second time I watched it through, Nobody Wants This on Netflix. But, one of the sisters had a meeting with, some executives about their podcast, and they were encouraged with and you and I know this strategy as coaches, the communication and listening tool of mirroring. And so, of just repeating back the last thing that someone said, and just repeating that back and using that as the, in like the open door for the person to continue to talk. And it's so funny. I was just doing a workshop on coaching yesterday within the company, and I use that as an example. And everyone's like, oh yeah, I remember that from that show. That totally worked. I'm like, and it works in real life too. Try it. And so it's just fun to see when you can make those connections for people of like, hey, this show that you watched and you liked, what are some ways that you can emulate some of those things? And of course, there are shows where, you watch Succession and you're like, okay, those are leaders that I may not want to emulate.
Red flag leader.
Red flag, right.
Stay away, get away as soon as you
Right. So it is fun to watch those and just pick up on things that you like or want to avoid in your leadership journey.
But that's a good example of a non-stressful way to apply something you've learned before or observe differently. So when you say you like to observe and learn organically, right? That's a great example for me of how you apply that. Like you're looking at this and thinking, oh, that's mirroring. That's why that's so powerful. And I know different people learn different ways, but for me to hear something is great, but to see it or experience it, then it anchors somewhere, and it will anchor with me. Like if you and I went through something together, I will anchor that memory with you. So it'd be like, oh yeah, I remember when Jen and I did that together, and that's how I can recall it. But it has to have more than just a theoretical placement in my brain.
100%, yes.
Okay, I'm going to bring this up and see where you want to go with it. Talk to me about Lewis and Clark.
Oh boy, Sarah, like, how many hours of podcast do you want to do here?
Hey, I have the power to edit. Go with what you want. We can break it into 2 episodes.
Oh my goodness. So So I was sharing with you that when I moved from Minneapolis to Kansas City, it opened up a whole new world of history that I was not really aware of. And sure, I read about it in a book, but like you're saying, until you are standing in the place, experiencing it, and grounding those memories, you learn it in a different way. And so when I came down here, and there's like signs everywhere of like the Lewis and Clark Trail, and right here on the Missouri River, there's this Lewis and Clark this and Lewis and Clark that. I'm just like, these guys are pretty fascinating. And so I started learning a little bit more, reading some books, going to more, historical Lewis and Clark sites around the, Missouri and Kansas area. And I started, like I always do, thinking about leadership. And I'm like, well, here are these two guys that the president was like, hey, you guys, so we just bought all this land in the other side of this country. We need a couple people to like get in some boats and go check it out. Do you guys want to do it? And they're like, okay, cool, we'll do it. Like, first of all, that's brave to say, we have zero idea what's out there. But yeah, let's get a bunch of dudes on a boat and a couple of boats and let's go find out. And it made me think about, of course, the immense courage that it takes to raise your hand and say yes and try new things. And I think that spoke to me because so much of my career has been that, where I just raise my hand, say yes, and try new things. So I loved that. But then I was also thinking about Lewis and Clark as leaders. So, they were on these boats with these guys, and these guys had to trust them. They had to trust that Lewis and Clark knew where they were going, knew what they were doing, and were able to, get through difficult times and keep people safe. And I was just thinking, as a leader, when you like have zero idea what you're doing, but you're trying to garner confidence of the people who are following you, how do you do that? How do you create a really engaged team? How do you create an engaged team and culture, whether it's on a boat or in an office building? What do you need to have in order to create that engaged team? And just think about two guys who are going out in the wilderness for a couple of years with zero idea of where they were going. That required some, I like to think there's probably some leadership lessons in Lewis and Clark. And I think about that a lot. And I talk a lot about courage and the courage to explore our Western frontier. And so I use the word Western frontier a lot just because it evokes this like Lewis and Clark thing for me. But one of the things, and I'll go back to confidence, people talk to me all the time about, I want to build confidence. I want to be more confident. This is this like underlying current of what I hear from a lot of emerging leaders. And sometimes they think that they need to be confident in order to do something at work or for the team. And I'm like, no, confidence is the byproduct of doing something brave. So you need courage, and then confidence will come. And I think about that a lot, and that's where I think of Lewis and Clark. And I have to tell you, Sarah, I have these little cute stuffed animals of Lewis and Clark and a bunch of other people from from that time. And I sometimes like play them and move them around and have them do brave stuff. So I like to bring my Lewis and Clark stuffed animals out and just encourage people about the courage it takes to do scary things and the confidence that follows.
I think that's a powerful reminder for all of us that we don't get to be confident before we have some courage, And I remember being told when I was volunteering for a crisis center that I had to testify in court for this. It ended up being a legal issue. And I said, no, not me. I'm a crisis worker. Behind the scenes, I don't do that. And the DA says to me, well, I need you to do this, for this woman's not going to have a spokesperson, right? And she'll have no voice. And okay, get me right where I got, right? It's like, okay, I'm not going to be that person who chickens out. I said, I'm so nervous, I don't think I can speak. This was the coolest thing he ever said to me. And he probably never would remember saying this. He said, I want to tell you, every time I get in front of a judge, I'm nervous. And I will tell you, if you are not nervous when you're standing up for something you believe in, you don't care enough. And he says, so you're just going to show up. I'll take care of you. I'll make sure I ask you questions you can answer. And I don't even remember going to court. I just remember it wasn't a stressful thing. But the whole thing, he says, your only job is keep your nerves, keep those butterflies, just fly them in formation, and then move. Let's go. We're going to take care of this. The best thing that came out of that, though, is had I not had the courage to step forward, I would not have liked what it told me about myself when it came to helping another person. Like that my fear was bigger than them. And I thought, I don't want to be that person, right? So that's your values coming in, right?
Yeah. I was just going to say that's a perfect example of your values coming in and allowing you to step into that courage.
But if you would have asked me at that time, what are your values? It's like sometimes your values come in with the voice behind us, put up or shut up. If this matters to you, you've got to put up,
Yes.
So, Jenna, I just really have enjoyed speaking with you today, and I like to leave you with the last word for our listeners. So as we're going out of the podcast today, 2 questions.
Yeah.
What should I have asked you that I did not ask you that you would like to share? And then I'm going to ask you to take us out of the podcast.
Oh my goodness. These are the hard questions, Sarah. Let's see. What should you have asked me that you didn't? I don't know. We went deep on a lot of stuff. I told you about mail. I told you about Lewis and Clark. I'm telling you stuff I don't tell a lot of people. So I'm a pretty open book. I think one of the things that I'm really proud of, and it allows me to explore my creativity as well as a lot of the ideas I have, is around my podcast. I have a podcast where I do explore this intersection of personal and professional development, and just recently launched season 3 of that. Really exploring, the hard work of being a new leader and going from a place of being a really strong individual contributor, and then all of a sudden, bam, you're leading people and you're leading teams, and holy smokes, you might not have the same. You might need different strengths to bring into that place, and so it's really exploring that.
So, what's the name of your podcast?
The name of the podcast is In With the Podcast. My tagline is Out with the Old, In with the You. And so really exploring the you. So figuring out what stories no longer work to carry around and which ones are the ones that you're designed to be.
I like it. We'll make sure there's a link in the notes for that. Okay, now you get to take us out. What do you want us to recall and take with us as we leave this interview?
Yeah, I mean, listen, every single one of us has these incredible, beautiful jewels that are deep inside of us, and it's up to us to find them and shine them up and give them to the world, because we're the only ones who can do that, and we're the only ones who know that. So taking the time to look back on your life and find those common threads of things that you love to do, things that light you up, and how can you do more of those? Because that is the you that you're designed to be. And just remember who the F you are when you start getting influenced by that ladder of success that you think you're supposed to be. No, remember who you are. Be more of that. That's who you're designed to be.
Okay, No Labels, No Limits podcast listeners. That is our charge for this week and beyond, to remember who we're supposed to be and show up that way. And until next week, I wish you all, each and every one of you, a successful week in however you define success. Go out there and break through your own limiting labels and beliefs.
You've been listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic business coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah at sarahbox.com/No Labels, No Limits podcast. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible. Please remember to rate, leave a 5-star review, and share the podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. Till next time, keep taking those daily action steps to align your purpose to your principles and achieve your goals in business and life.